We finally got patch 2.1 that we've been asking Riot for ages, and it had a double whammy of both balance changes and new champion Aphelios. It featured many good balance changes like a nerf to the Grand Plaza hitting Scouts and Lucian Hecarim, a nerf to power cascade hitting Zoe Lee Sin, and additionally we saw the revival of the Riven package, and most importantly a hush nerf, increasing the viability of a variety of decks focusing on buffing, like Riven, Taric, Viktor and many more. This video will look at the top 10 decks for win rates in patch 2.1 so far, with a special BomberTV deck that's entered the meta, one of his own crafts with an insane win rate. This is Top 10 Decks Patch 2.1. This video has been done in collaboration with BomberTV. Please remember to like and subscribe and turn on the bell notifications too. So let's dive in. Kalista Elise is basically a mono Shadow Isles deck with the exception of 3 copies of Pale Cascade. It's an aggro deck and has a typical low average mana cost with all the cards but 2 copies of the Harrowing costing 4 or less mana. It's fairly cheap with 23 common cards in total. This deck is very interesting. The reason why we go mono Shadow Isles is so we can activate Wraithcaller more consistently. Wraithcaller has the Allegiance effect to summon a Mist Wraith. Allegiance only activates when the top card in your deck matches this card's region, so you obviously want to be able to activate this as much as possible, so you run lots of cards in one faction to increase these odds. This deck also includes 3 copies of Mist Wraith, the key card in this deck, who grants other allied Mist Wraiths everywhere 1 damage when summoned. We're also running Risen Mists, which is a burst spell which summons Mist Wraith, basically meaning you have 3 really easy ways to summon this card and activate the effect as many times as possible. Don't worry too much about your units dying, as they will simply fill your finisher pool, which is the Harrowing. The Harrowing allows you to revive the 6 strongest allies that died this game and grants them Ephemeral. More often than not, you'll probably want to keep this card, the Harrowing, in your opening hand if you already have a smooth curve to reach that late game finish that you want. Elise will sometimes level up, but this is pretty rare as we don't run much spider synergy in this deck, as we're obviously not using Noxus, but she's basically there as a very good 2-drop. Kalista on the other hand would much be better to level up in this deck, and to be honest, even once she's leveled up she can die and be revived attacking when you cast a Harrowing, which is pretty valuable. It's a nice combo here. If you have a Wraithcaller that has already died, then she's going to resurrect this, which will in turn summon an additional Mist Wraith. So talk about value here, you're going to be summoning so many cards all at once, your opponent won't be able to deal with it. Basically a win condition. You can very often get your key cards with Glimpse Beyond and Stalking Shadows, which allow easy ways of drawing. The latter in particular is very useful to start your chain of Wraithcallers. So overall a very solid aggro deck with a very strong finisher indeed. This deck got hit with the Pale Cascade nerf, but overall this deck is still doing pretty fine in my opinion. It kind of scrapes onto the top 10 list, so in future versions of this video I wouldn't expect it to hover around. This is Go Hard Shadow Isles Bilgewater featuring Elise and Twisted Fate. It's pretty much a combo deck and it has a low average mana cost with all but 3 cards costing 4 or less mana. It's actually quite an expensive deck to build with 6 epics and 6 champions. It actually started out as a meme deck, but it's actually become a solid meta deck recently, and it's actually looking pretty good with the latest expansion as well. This deck is a pretty unique concept featuring the new KDA card Go Hard. It's a slow spell that drains 1 from a unit and shuffles 2 identical copies into your deck. Once cast 3 times, it transforms into a very OP Pack Your Bags, which I'll discuss later. The aim of this deck is to play a standard control Shadow Isles playstyle or focus on the Go Hard card mechanic. You want to keep drawing cards to get the magic free as quickly as possible through Twisted Fate's blue card or Bilgewater draw cards like Salvage. From that simple idea, the deck builds itself. You have controlled tiles from Shadow Isles such as Vengeance and Go Hard itself. Use Vengeance to take out key units and Go Hard to drain your opponent 3 times, before going into that big combo piece I discussed earlier, Pack Your Bags. This deals 5 to all enemies and the opposing nexus. The rest of the cards are mainly there for curve purposes, and your main plan is either to level up Twisted Fate or go for the Go Hard plan. definitely a fun deck to play and having quite a successful time at the moment. Since patch 2.1, Go Hard has been dropping in viability as more strategies continue to evolve, but keep in mind that this archetype is still there and not fully dead, so it could pop up again at any time. This is Freljord Overwhelm, which is basically a mono Freljord deck featuring 3 copies of Calling Strike. The 2 champions are Sejuani and Tryndamere, and these 2 cards both have Overwhelm fitting in theme with the rest of the deck. It's actually quite a budget deck with 0 epics and 22 commons, and the average mana cost is quite high with 9 cards costing 7 or more mana. The deck is based upon the core game mechanic Overwhelm, and the best region for doing this is Freljord, and it also takes advantage of their allegiance card, a Fearsome Outrider, which grants the top ally in your deck 3/3 and Overwhelm when summoned with the allegiance effect. This deck has a solid curve throughout the whole game, and starts the early game with Omen Hawk and a Fearsome Trapper. Omen Hawk can buff your cards, and Trapper can quickly find you a powerful 5/5 Enraged Yeti. Continue the development with a Fearsome Outrider, which could buff the Enraged Yeti created by a Fearsome Trapper. This will give you a 1 mana 8/8 unit with Overwhelm. This is one of the strongest combos in the game at the moment. Then finish off the game with your big guys like Sejuani and Tryndamere. Sejuani should level up quickly due to the overwhelmed damage you should be dealing each turn, so you'll be able to quickly take advantage of a leveled up effect. Another fantastic card in this deck is Battle Fury, which is always going to be extremely threatening and potentially lethal for your opponent on overwhelm units. Battle Fury increases the stats of a card by 8 damage and 4 health. This is a counter deck to the Go Hard deck we're seeing at the moment, as you can get rid of those chump blockers quite easily by having Overwhelm in your deck, and this ensures basically damage will go through to your Nexus and go for the win, rather than Go Hard obviously blocking it to suit their needs. Scouts has been staple since the release of Bilgewater, defining what the aggro strategy to beat is. This deck has an incredible curve benefiting from all the great units coming from Demacia. It's basically mono Demacia featuring 3 copies of Misfortune. In patch 1.12, the playstyle of this deck has not changed much, but seems to have success due to mid-range doing well in the current meta. On the mulligan, you always want to keep Misfortune and Quinn, as those are key cards in the deck, but it's also important to have your 1-drops, Fleet Feather Tracker in particular, so you can also swap your Quinn for a Lucian if you feel Lucian suits your playstyle better, so a little bit of flexibility here. You want to level up Misfortune as fast as possible, which is always great if you want to attack with your scouts, so don't worry about killing your scouts, because basically you just need to get those attack rounds in as much as possible. You also have a lot of ways to generate value thanks to your tricks. Rangers Resolve to counter AoEs and get value trades on wide blocks. And you've also got single combat to remove their key cards, often getting a value trade by doing that. There's also Riposte as a way to shield from removal and deal bonus damage. And finally Back to Back, which is amazing if casted on your scout units, as they benefit from double the amount for that. Obviously they're getting 2 attacks, so double the bonus. Scouts got a big hit. Both Misfortune and Grand Plaza got nerfed, 2 key cards in this archetype. The deck was so strong that we still see it in the top 10, but it definitely went down in terms of consistency and viability. So what I've done is I've included the deck code in the description that doesn't actually run Grand Plaza, so you should only really notice the Misfortune nerf, so therefore it's still got a pretty good win rate. Fiora Shen is primarily a Demacia deck, which also features 13 cards from Iona. It's a mid-range deck which takes advantage of 2 keywords, Barrier and Challenger. So in other words, revolves around very simple combat where you're doing favourable fights and protecting your units. It's a fairly expensive deck featuring 5 epic cards. Value and flexibility are the keywords with this deck. Take as many value trades as possible, which is very easy with challenges such as Screeching Dragon and Fiora. Screeching Dragon is a great common card from the last expansion, and Fiora can simply act as a cheap 3-power challenger card here. Try to give them barrier with cards like Shen and Riposte. Shen gives a supported ally barrier this round, and Riposte gives an ally 3 damage and barrier this round as well. There are also lots of tricks to take advantage and punish your opponent with, like single combat and sharp sight. Note they both involve combat to kind of fit in theme with the deck. Single combat obviously allows a favourable fight, and sharp sight makes sure you're buffed enough to kill over a key unit or survive a key fight. If value doesn't win you the game, you always have the Fiora win condition, which is easily achievable with all the protection barrier cards you have in this deck, including Iona cards such as Spirit's Refuge. So overall, a very solid deck fitting most playstyles and players. This is Zoe Lee Sin Targon and features cards from Targon and Iona. It's a very spell heavy deck featuring 23 spells in total. Has a lot of low cost cards too, with 23 costing 2 or less mana. The deck is fairly expensive with 6 epic cards. This deck is the finest example of how a combo deck can work. You want to survive against aggro decks, and you want to get your combo out as fast as possible against control decks before they get to their late game. The combo here is to level up Lee Sin, cast Zenith Blade on his ability so it hits the Nexus and removes the blocker, and then with the Overwhelm from Zenith Blade, Lee Sin will actually hit the Nexus, making it an unblockable double attack, which seems broken, and to be honest it probably is. You would think that this is really simple and easy to achieve. In theory it is if you can survive long enough. For this we have cards like Sparklefly and Eye of the Dragon. Sparklefly and Eye of the Dragon's Draglings both have lifesteal, so you'll consistently summon Draglings with this as the deck has so many low cost spells. Buff your lifesteal cards up with spells like Pale Cascade and Bastion to make their damage bigger, meaning your lifesteal heal is also bigger as a result. Next, we want to level up Lee Sin, and to do this we have to cast cheap spells, and cards which generate those cheap spells, for example Mentor of the Stones who can create gems, or Pale Cascade once again, as this is just 2 mana. Then occasionally you may have removal spells of challenger cards trying to take out your Lee Sin, and aside from his obviously natural barrier you can get through his ability, you can also cast protections like Deny or Bastion once again. With the introduction of Zoe, the Lee Sin Targon archetype got some changes, but essentially plays out the same way. Zoe can generate super cool star charts which contributes to Lee Sin leveling up, so it's not really key to the theme of the deck, so she basically acts as a glorified follower. So overall this is a very skill based deck, and in the right hands can be absolutely devastating. This archetype had Pale Cascade and Hush nerfed in it, but this deck I would still say is super solid as the core cards in this deck theme remain untouched, but just a little bit of consistency from those support nerfs. Ezreal Draven is a deck featuring cards from Piltover and Zorn and Noxus. It features a very balanced mix of spells and followers and has a very low average mana cost with all but 2 copies of Captain Farron costing 4 or less mana. It's relatively expensive featuring 5 epic cards. The core idea of this deck is to get your Captain Farron out as fast as possible and finish the game with him. To accomplish this goal you need to do 3 things: draw him, survive, and deal a little bit of damage before he comes onto the board. To accomplish the draw part, we have the so-called discard package. Discard to draw cards like Sump Dredger and Rummage are fantastic draw tools, which unfortunately would not really increase your hand size, but basically quickly cycle through your deck faster to get the cards you need. That's where Draven, Chump Wump and Ballistic Bot come in. By generating cards which are not as very useful, you can use them as basically easy discard targets and replace them with more valuable cards. To survive, you have lots and lots of control tools, like Mystic Shot and Thermogenic Beam. Use these to take out your opponent's key cards. On top of that, all the units from the discard package are pretty good blockers too. Ezreal can be involved in your game plan, which also helps on the control side, giving you additional Mystic Shots. Finish off by summoning Captain Farron and using his Overwhelm and the decimates he generates to quickly finish off your opponent. Captain Farron that appears in this deck got nerfed, and this deck is much more noticeable than all the others that he was basically running. So this deck is still super consistent though, which is why it's still pretty high on this list, but not the number 1 spot. Here is another deck you'll definitely recognise. It's Pirate Aggro featuring cards from Noxus and Bilgewater. It's an aggro deck with a very mixed mana cost, with several cards costing all the different mana costs from 1 to 5. It's quite an expensive deck to build with 8 epic cards in total. The power cards here are Misfortune and Gangplank. Even if Misfortune will struggle to level up, she's here just a consistent way basically to level up Gangplank and make your board much more threatening on your attacking turns. Gangplank can then end the game against wide boards and therefore making aggro mirror matches quite easy with this deck. This deck wants to develop a board early on, and you can do this with a very quick start to the game with burn cards such as Lieben Saboteur and Jagged Butcher. Afterwards, it has a lot of ways to end the game with burn with units like Imperial Demolitionist or Jack the Winner. Jack the Winner creates a Sleep with the Fishes each round, which deals 2 to an ally to deal 2 to the opposing Nexus. You also have Zap Spray Fin, which will be able to draw you a Noxen for 4, always, as this is your only spell card with 3 or less mana, and this is obviously a fantastic card in this deck which can be very aggressive. If you reach late game, you can quickly close the game with Captain Farron and Decimate. Using the Overwhelm on Captain Farron and the pure damage from Decimate will quickly reduce your opposing Nexus to 0. So overall this is a pretty solid deck and a very fast one too, so if you want to rank up quickly, this is definitely an option I recommend. Pirate Aggro receives a nerf to Captain Farron, but some deck lists of this Pirate Aggro archetype don't even include him. So even if they do, you're going to have such a strong aggressive opener with 2 Decimates that's probably going to be more than enough for this deck, so I'd say it's basically unchanged. This is Discard Aggro, a deck you definitely recognise from previous deck lists. It features cards from Piltover and Zorn and Noxus and features 3 different champions, Teemo, Draven and Jinx. You can include 2 or any 3 of the combination here. The average mana cost is very low, with 23 cards costing 2 or less and 14 costing 1 or less. The most expensive card in the deck is Augmented Experimenter. The deck plan is quite simple. Against slow decks, try to finish your opponent as early as possible before they get their endgame. Against aggro or mid-range decks, you can try and win the race against them to see who can finish faster, or you can go for the value approach granted by the leveled up Jinx. Of course, you need to first draw her and then level her up. As the name suggests, the deck is all around discarding, so cards which you can both discard and draw are very desirable, such as Zornite Urchin and Rummage. The deck has a lot of options, smart plays, and therefore is a very skill-based deck. First of all, it's always important to know when to discard a card and what ones you should be discarding altogether. For example, there are obvious discard targets such as Flame Chompers, Jury Rig and Vision, and these are pretty straightforward what to discard. As for the when to discard a card, Jury Rig can be useful to summon a blocker or attack at burst speed, either punishing their open attack or to go in for the kill. The same goes for discarding Flame Chompers at burst speed, although it is much more useful to remove a big blocker so that your other units can basically go in and do what they need to do. Vision should be used to go in for the kill and take your opponent off guard, or to complete trades. This can almost be a win condition in some situations. With the new addition of survival skills, Discard Aggro seems to be getting a lot of love from Riot at the moment, and continues to be one of the best spots in the meta. Even if this list doesn't run survival skills, I would still suggest experimenting with it. This is Aggro 1-turn kill Riven Zed and features cards from Noxus and Iona. It contains mostly Noxus cards but also features Zed, Notify, Deny, and the latest Iona card, Flurry of Fists. Has a very low average mana cost with 32 cards costing 3 or less mana. It has an above average cost to build with 5 epic cards. This is one of the rarest archetypes, Aggro Combo, and it's very hard to pilot it. It's very skill intensive and requires a lot of knowledge of the metagame, but if you can manage it, it's nearly unstoppable. This kind of archetype has the properties of aggro, but being able to compete with other aggro strategies and win fast against control, and also has the properties of a combo deck, being able to punish slower playstyles of the control decks even more. The idea here is to have a very big unit full of buffs and then give it quick attack and put the cherry on top with the new card Flurry of Fists, granting it double attack for an insane amount of damage. First of all, you need buffs, and we have plenty of them in the form of Blade Fragment and the Blade of Exile itself, and others such as Might, a very important one to make Zed able to go through, and Nexus Strike to level up even if he gets blocked. It also has some pretty big attack buff as well, which synergizes quite nicely with this deck. Of course, these buffs are useless without units to cast them on, and there's 3 main targets in this deck that you can cast them on. Zed is probably the best one, being able to clone itself with the Living Shadows with all the keywords makes it the best target for the Blade of Exile, as well as Fury of Fists, to create 2 8/3s with double attack and overwhelm for potential 32 damage. Take this even further with buffs from Might or Coat of the Arm, your opponent will not know what hit them. Shirazza the Blade is your next best target, and you may start to connect the dots here. Any unit can get double the output of potential damage is what we're looking for, and Shira is a bit weaker than Zed if she gets blocked, as obviously she deals less damage, and then Zed and his Living Shadows, but if she's unblocked she can deal an insane amount of damage, so if you play at the right time here, it's going to be pretty lethal. Your third best target is Riven. She only doubles the buff on attack, and only one time, but often this is big enough to deal 20 or more damage, and given you're probably already going to have your opponent's Nexus health reduced to a low amount at this stage in the game, it's probably more than enough. So overall this deck is incredibly fun, surprising, and actually a little bit competitive as well. It's currently competitive due to the buffs of the Riven package and a nerf to Hush. So we see that the fangs of Riven have been sharpened while the one of its kind of predators have been dull. I like that animal analogy there. This is a BomberTV personal deck list and win rate, and he thinks that this will soon become meta and more stats will become available on this analysis shortly, so please give it a try and check out his video in the card above or the pinned comment down below, where he'll do a more in-depth version of how to use this deck. And there we go guys, what do you think to the latest top 10? We also got some new cards in this patch, even though it's a little bit early to kind of foresee if they're going to be competitive or not. So right now people are kind of going with their cards that they know work, which is why I don't think there's an Aphelios deck in the top 10 at the moment. Do you guys think he's competitive? The data presented here is analysed by BomberTV using MOBA Analytics. He's a Masters tier player with a background in game theory and game design. He took the most winning archetypes into Master tier, excluding ones with small play rates, analysed their key properties on why they are so strong. Link to his channel is in a pinned comment and in the card above. What do you think the best deck is in patch 2.1? I would love to hear in the comments. Up next is best Aphelios decks and strategies. You won't want to miss this one. Please remember to like and subscribe and turn on bell notifications too. See you next time guys.